The red lines, once believed to be untouchable in modern political history, were shattered in the skies over Caracas on the morning of January 3, 2026. It emerged that Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro had been removed from his own stronghold on the direct order of U.S. President Donald Trump. Maduro was seized by the world's most elite military unit, Delta Force, and transported to U.S. soil. This was an operation no country on earth would normally dare to attempt, let alone imagine. It sent a clear message that Washington had reasserted control over its backyard through an absolute display of force. As U.S. forces moved toward Caracas, the Joint Air Component began systematically dismantling Venezuela's air defense network. At that moment, the advanced radar systems and S-300 air defenses that Russia had heavily promoted to Venezuela suddenly went silent. A Chinese delegation reportedly observed the operation without the ability to intervene. Within just 30 minutes, the mission was complete, without a single American soldier killed and only minor injuries reported. Maduro's capture concluded aboard the USS Iwo. But this was only the surface of the story. Shortly after the operation, the United States announced a package of follow-up measures to manage any instability that might emerge. This announcement came directly from Donald Trump himself. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do so safely, properly, and judiciously. Trump's declaration that the U.S. would remain actively involved in any post-Maduro crisis marked the beginning of a new and far harsher era in Latin America. The game in Caracas was over. Washington's rules were now in effect. This was not simply an arrest. It was a surgical military intervention that will be studied for decades. The operation began months earlier with an invisible intelligence web. According to the New York Times, CIA assets had penetrated deep into Venezuela, monitoring Maduro's movements, daily habits, sleep patterns, and even his meals since August, building the digital framework of the mission. The buildup was visible long before the strike. Nearly 10 U.S. warships and more than 5,000 naval and air personnel had been positioned across the Caribbean. When the moment arrived, the U.S. Army's most secretive and lethal unit, Delta Force, was deployed. Maduro's presidential residence at Fort Tiuna, described by Trump as a fortress, became the target. Under cover of darkness, Delta Force teams breached reinforced steel doors and walls using specialized cutting tools and blowtorches, slicing through defenses built to protect the Venezuelan leader. Trump later confirmed these details himself. The infiltration was so fast and precise that Maduro's security detail had no chance to respond. Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were taken into custody before any organized resistance could form. The ground phase followed classic shock and awe doctrine. Above them, the United States achieved total air dominance. As Delta Force moved in, the United States Air Force and Navy eliminated Venezuela's ability to intervene. Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from the USS Gerald R. Ford and accompanying destroyers struck key military infrastructure around Caracas. Strategic sites, including General Francisco de Miranda Air Base and Higuerote Airport, were rendered unusable through precise bombardment. These strikes were not meant for destruction alone. Their purpose was to deny the Venezuelan Air Force any chance of intercepting Delta Force extraction routes, following anti-access, area denial doctrine. Runways were cratered, fuel depots destroyed, and aircraft grounded. Even pilots loyal to Maduro had no means to launch. This brings us to the most critical technical detail: the fate of Venezuela's Russian-made air defense systems. Venezuela possessed advanced systems including the S-300VM, Buk M2E, and Tor M1. In recent months, Russia had also supplied more than 20 Su-30 fighter jets and additional air defense batteries. Yet on that night, radar screens either went dark or were abandoned. United States electronic warfare may have blinded these systems. However, international reports suggest Venezuelan commanders anticipated the strike, shut down defenses, and left Maduro isolated. This claim remains unconfirmed. But one fact stands out clearly. Russian military technology was completely ineffective against United States electronic warfare and operational speed. Another critical phase targeted paramilitary forces. Training camps belonging to Colectivos and FI's units in Carmen de Uria were struck by United States air power. These groups represented the regime's street enforcement arm and posed a risk of urban conflict or rescue attempts. Eliminating them early ensured the operation stayed controlled and avoided civilian casualties. Trump's confirmation that no United States troops were killed highlights the level of intelligence coordination and firepower integration. Maduro and his wife were extracted under the protection of AH-64 Apache helicopters, transferred to the USS Iwo and later flown to New York to face American justice. This was not just a military victory. It was a technical demonstration of dominance. In under 30 minutes, Washington neutralized a nation's leadership air defenses and command structure without resistance. The Chavista base, long fed on propaganda of invincibility, experienced an ideological collapse upon learning their leaders had been taken aboard a U.S. ship in their sleepwear. In politics, power vacuums are filled instantly, with fear and uncertainty. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez's desperate statement, "We don't know where Maduro is. We want proof of life," exposed the total breakdown of internal communication. A government discovering on television that its president had been seized was confirmation that the state apparatus had collapsed. Some blame Maduro's recklessness. Others argue there was no real unity left in Venezuela, politically or militarily. Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino Lopez's vow to resist foreign forces proved meaningless. The chain of command capable of resistance had evaporated overnight. The reflection of this operation on the streets was nothing short of emotional chaos. One segment of society, especially those exhausted by Maduro's rule and people crushed by years of poverty, took to the streets celebrating. Pots and pans echoed through neighborhoods as chants of freedom filled the air. Tears of joy flowed freely. Similar scenes unfolded among the Venezuelan diaspora in Doral, Florida, where celebrations revealed just how deep the psychological impact of this operation truly was. On the ground, the tactical success of the U.S. operation could be measured in Caracas itself. But the strategic shockwaves traveled far beyond Venezuela. In Moscow and Beijing, the consequences were seismic. Donald Trump and the Pentagon did not merely capture a narco-dictator. They shattered the long-promoted dream of a multipolar world in the 21st century, right in the heart of Latin America. This was the clearest, most ruthless, and most humiliating geopolitical checkmate of modern history. One of the most ironic and strategically striking details of the entire operation lies in its timing. On the very day Maduro was captured, a high-level Chinese delegation was present in Caracas. Chinese diplomats were likely shaking hands with Maduro or preparing meetings focused on new energy deals and infrastructure projects. Instead, the U.S. military quite literally kicked the door down. And Russia, when we get things straightened out. But as for other countries that want oil, we're in the oil business. We're going to sell it. We're not going to say no. This was a message aimed directly at Beijing, delivered not in diplomatic language, but through raw force. Economic power, the message said, is no shield against American military access. China stood powerless as a leader it had invested billions into, and publicly declared a strategic partner, was taken away before its eyes. For Xi Jinping, this moment exposed to the world just how fragile the security guarantees of the Belt and Road Initiative truly are. The Russian front presents even more devastating consequences. Vladimir Putin had long viewed Venezuela as a Trojan horse in America's backyard. Over the years, S-300 air defense systems, Su-30 fighter jets, military advisors, and Wagner mercenaries were poured into the country. The objective was clear: threaten the United States from the south and create a deterrent shield. Yet on the night of January 3rd, that entire Russian military architecture collapsed like a paper tiger. Russian-made air defense systems failed to stop American missiles and helicopters. Some may not have even been activated. This marks the second and possibly fatal blow to the reputation of Russia's arms industry following its performance in Ukraine. Putin's long-standing "we protect our allies" doctrine now lies buried in the waters of the Caribbean. The once rhetorical question, "When will you go after Putin and Lukashenko?" has transformed into a real fear echoing through the corridors of the Kremlin. With this move, Washington did not merely revive the Monroe Doctrine, it supercharged it. The United States demonstrated that it will not tolerate rival powers establishing political or military footholds in the Western Hemisphere, proving this by removing heads of state from their beds if necessary. The condemnations voiced by Brazilian President Lula and Colombian leader Petro reflect this growing anxiety. Left-leaning governments across Latin America now understand that their sovereignty hangs by a thin thread. Crossing Washington's red lines may mean losing power or freedom. The signal sent to Iran is just as impossible to ignore. Statements from Iran's foreign ministry condemning violations of sovereignty do little to change the reality. Tehran's gold for oil trade with Venezuela and its strategic depth in the region evaporated overnight. By taking Maduro, the United States severed a critical junction connecting drug trafficking, terrorist financing, and anti-American alliances, cleanly and decisively. Ultimately, Operation Southern Spear did not simply rearrange pieces on the global chessboard, it flipped the table entirely. China's money and Russia's missiles proved useless against American hard power. Trump showed that peace through strength is not a slogan, but a doctrine that can be enforced in the most extreme manner when required. No dictator, no openly anti-American leader, can now feel safe behind palace walls. The lights that went out in Caracas that night may also be remembered as the dimming of Beijing's and Moscow's spheres of influence. Maduro's image aboard an American warship is now etched into history, not just as the downfall of a narco-terror baron, but as the collapse of the illusion that some regimes are untouchable. Trump's words, "I told him to surrender. He didn't listen. Now he wishes he had," sum up Washington's posture in the emerging world order. The Venezuela operation signals that global geopolitics has returned to its factory settings. The helplessness of the Chinese delegation, the silence of Russian missiles, and the surgical precision of U.S. Delta Force all scream one truth. Those who write the rules decide how the game ends. The bells tolling for Maduro today may toll tomorrow for another supposedly untouchable leader in another capital. Analysts are paying especially close attention to Iran. In Tehran, Maduro's downfall is not viewed as the loss of an ally, but as a preview of its own worst-case scenario. Venezuela was not merely an oil partner for Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps and Quds Force. It was their most critical operational safe haven directly under America's nose. The night Maduro was captured, Iran's illicit financial networks, intelligence cells, and strategic depth in the Western Hemisphere were effectively shut down. By cleaning up Caracas, Washington severed one of Tehran's main oxygen lines in Latin America. The rushed condemnations from Iran's foreign ministry reflect panic over whether they are next, rather than grief over a fallen ally. In short, the storm that began in Latin America shows no sign of stopping. In the coming months, the ripple effects of the Maduro operation will become clearer. What already seems certain is that Russia, China, and Iran can no longer rest easy.